All right, what is up, everybody? This is Alex once again with another episode of the EOT News Flash. This is episode 98, Challenging Thoughts. Yes, it's another week of Magic the Happenings, and I've always expected there to be like a week, just like 1 week out of the year, aside from the holidays, where nothing really happens Magic-wise. There isn't some, thought-provoking article that gets released or some kind of news that Wizards drops on us, but as this is the internet after all, something's always out there to talk about. And lo and behold, we have two things tonight. And of course, I'm going to start off with fun new products. Well, actually, this is a returning product. These are the announcement from last week, the 2019 Challenger deck list. Actually, they were announced earlier this week, so pretty fresh in the minds of Magic players. Now, of course, the Challenger decks were a really cool product from last year that were designed to help new players walk into an F&M and not have to worry about their brew, that they just, cobble together of a couple booster packs and maybe a deck builder's toolkit and get completely run over by finely tuned tier 1 standard decks. So they put together the 4 decks from last year. We had a mono red aggro deck, a Mardu colored vehicle aggro deck, more of a mid-rangey kind of deck, a green-black energy deck that really took advantage of the energy mechanic from Kaladesh, and a blue-white control deck based on primarily Approach of the Second Sun from the Amonkhet block. And they were really successful. I didn't see those boxes in my local game store. They were sold out within a couple of weeks. So definitely a very popular product, and like I mentioned, a very good gateway product for new players to just be able to pick up a box. It's a 75 card deck that could walk into an F&M, pick up a box, save it up real fast, and play a competitive game of Magic. Are they going to win? Maybe, but they're still going to put up a fight because these decks were chocked full of rares and mythics and full play sets of the key cards. If you think back to the intro decks that you might have picked up when you were starting to play Magic just a couple of years ago, you had 1 or 2 copies of a couple of cards, one really bad rare, another decently playable rare, and that was it. We had event decks for a while, which were decent. I can remember playing my first, what I consider to be a competitive F&M with the mono red Mirrored and Besieged event deck, which I had a lot of fun with. But these have really kind of taken that to the next level, and we're seeing, like I mentioned, mythics. We're seeing rares and multiple copies of these mythics and rares. And upon initial inspection, I was really thinking that they might have missed a little bit. I'm still a little bit torn here, but a lot of people online are speaking to the contrary. But the more I've read it, the more I've analyzed these decks, the more I'm kind of realizing that we might have ourselves a Godfather 2 or a Ride the Lightning kind of instance here, where these decks are actually very, very good and worthy successors of last year. So let's take a look at these decks lists here real quick and kind of see what they're trying to do here. Now, a quick note, obviously we're not going to see a single Ravnica Allegiance card in these decks. They took the Pro Tour, the Mythic Championship from last year, the Guilds of Ravnica Mythic Championship, and designed those decks around that tournament. So we're not going to see any Simic cards. We're not going to see Simic Nexus. We're not going to see the Gates decks. We're not going to see any of that. So these are a little bit, I would say, behind the curve. Just because, as they mentioned in the article here on the mothership, it's pretty hard to predict what an extra set of 5 shock lands an entire set is going to do to a format. And of course, they have to be able to design these decks, have enough time to actually print the cards and get them out to store shelves in time for people to actually play with these decks before the format rotates. So it is what it is. So the first one we have here is United Assault. It's a mono white aggro deck. Lots of cheap little 1-drops, Dauntless Bodyguard, Healer Hawk, the Bane of My Existence, and Guilds of Ravnica drafts. Leonin Vanguard, Skymarcher Aspirant, just a ton of 1-drops and a little bit of life gain as well. And you get some really punishing rares in here with Banalish Marshal and History Benalia and a couple copies of Legion's Landing. So you get a lot of really powerful, early game plays to just punch your opponent down until they're dead, and hopefully they don't Kaya's Wrath you, but they're not in these decks, so it doesn't matter. These are really cool. I like a good mono white deck. It's a very good entry level deck for new players. It's if you've drafted a little bit and you kind of understand mana curve, this is a really good one because it just sticks around the 4-drop slots and just has a cut and has very little in terms of what I would consider to be interaction. So you're just able to kind of just play your cards, attack, block, and hopefully get enough points of damage to win. So it's a really cool deck, very simple, straightforward. Obviously, there's a couple of cool cards in the sideboard. I do like seeing Tokali Honor Guard, which doesn't really fit the meta right now, obviously. Make a stand, and not, this is a great one to blow out the wrath effects of the format. Merciful Cleric, not really a graveyard deck in the format right now. But like I said, as a good level 1 deck for a new standard player, I wouldn't be embarrassed to sleeve this up and take this to my FNM. So a good starting point, and definitely a lot of room to expand. And they do talk a lot about that in the article as well. So good stage 1, and you can always expand upon this as well. All right, moving right along, of course, we have a mono red deck because there's always a mono red deck. And this is Lightning Aggro. We had a mono red deck last time around. It only makes sense that there's a mono red deck this time around. And there's not a whole lot that looks out of place here. This is probably what I would consider the closest to a tier 1 standard deck as you can probably get out of the box and it not be completely jam-packed with value, as we'll see in a minute. Actually, there's definitely been some concessions made here. Rekindling Phoenix is kind of the big card out of this, as is Goblin Chain Whirler. Just a really low to the ground, aggressive deck with kind of a wizard sub-theme, so you do have things like Wizard's Lightning to be powered up all from a majority of a lot of the wizards in this deck. And, of course, the absolute powerhouse enchantment and Experimental Frenzy. Sideboard, super straightforward, just a couple of spells there. Diamond Mare, that's cute. I mean, to play the mirror and just slam this and all right, your turn. That's pretty adorable. But yeah, in terms of just straightforward right out of the box, the mono white deck is good. It's a good example of this. I think this is an even better example of this. Sit down, shuffle up, and burn your opponent's face off. It doesn't get much more simple than this. Moving right along, we've got Deadly Discovery, which is our black-green sort of mid-range deck for this season's Challenger decks. And this is where I start to get I'm a little confused on what they're actually trying to do here. Obviously, this is being based off of the green-black Explorer deck, the green-black mid-range deck from Guilds of Ravnica standard. And we do see a lot of key pieces here. We've got Merfolk Branchwalker, Wildgrowth Walker, Jadelight Seer Squire is a little bit of a weird one, but it's obvious in here for budgetary constraints. Only 2 copies of Jadelight Ranger, and I'm kind of wondering, what did they add here so that they could only put in 2 copies of this? I mean, this is one of the best cards in the deck, and I don't think they should have cut this down to 2 copies when they were giving the mono red deck and mono white deck 4 of some of their best rares. Now, obviously, we do get a Vraska Relic Seeker, which is pretty cool. I would have liked to have seen Golgari Queen Vraska instead, as this one is going to rotate out relatively soon. And now we do obviously get some cool things in the mana base, at least. 2 copies of Woodland Cemetery. Only a single Overgrown Tomb, though. It just kind of strikes at me as weird. Of all the decks, all 4 decks, this is the only one that has a Shockland in it. And I think that's I don't know what to think about that, honestly. Obviously, you can't put them in a mono white or a mono red deck. Obviously, if we fast forward to today's standard, where we are seeing blue white aggro and green red aggro, we are seeing copies of the Shocklands in there to support that little bit of a splash at really no expense to the mana base. And obviously, budgetary constraints are a thing, so you can't just jam these full of value. But I think I would have liked to have seen just a little bit more in terms of value here, and consistency. Put the best cards in here, and really just kind of stretch the muscles of the deck here. It might be too good though if they did that. I honestly couldn't say. This might just be the best out of the 4 if they had just jammed this pack full of all the cards they needed. But it is a little strange to see a deck that typically would play a lot of 4 ofs, much like a mono red or mono white aggro deck with a couple of one-off removal spells here and there. This one just kind of strikes me as a bit of a concession, and I'm not sure if I like that or not, but it's still a very good deck. Definitely, I keep using the term level 1 deck. Obviously, this would not be able to compete with the Simic decks the Sultai decks that are doing really well right now in Standard. Not having access to Hydroid Crassus obviously is a huge thing here. But if you do want to buy into this kind of a deck and then have the room to expand up by picking up your breeding pools, and your other shotguns that you would need, as well as your Hydroid Crassuses, this is a really good starting point, and I think that might be kind of the intention here, was to be able to expand in different ways if you wanted to. There's a couple of different ways you can kind of like take this deck if you wanted to, which of course they do make a little bit of mention of in the article here. Now the last one here, this is our control deck, or our tempo deck. This was the one that really kind of threw me for a loop, and this is one I looked at immediately. I thought, I'm honest, just because I'm always curious to see what they're going to do with the blue deck, because traditionally it's tricky to make a blue sealed product that isn't specifically designed for, like, let's say the guild kits or a commander product or a dual deck of some sorts or things like that. Just because I'm wholly convinced, and Wizards is continuously proving this to me, that they're making it harder and harder for Control to exist in Standard. Now, obviously, we do have Esper Control playing a really big part in the Standard metagame right now, because they just give us just enough cards to be able to fight everything. Obviously, Nexus of Fate being kind of a big part of that. Search for Escanta, Kaya's Wrath, those are all pieces that make the whole thing work together, but it usually does take a good number of sets to really coalesce into what I would consider to be an ideal control deck. My opinion, of course. So this is the one I looked at first, and it just kind of struck me as kind of strange. It's they say it's arcane, so it's a tempo deck, arcane tempo, but we do see copies of Niv-Mizzet Perun in here. It's a 6-mana freaking spell. That's not a tempo play. That's a control bomb that you play on turn 12, because after that you've got mana to hold up to counter the removal spells for it and just everything else. But I think it's okay because, when talking about value, this is the one that is chocked absolutely full of it. Saffron Olive over on MTG Goldfish did a breakdown of the cost-wise, and this is when they were released on Monday, the deck list that is. This one was twice the value of the other decks. This one hit to about $120-something, really just because you've got a copy of Arclight Phoenix, which is still a $20, $25 card, and Sulphur Falls, which has got to be a $10, $15 card as well. So there's a ton of value in here, but I think that comes at the expense of a coherent plan. Goblin Electromancer, I don't think saw play in the blue-red spells deck. I have to go back and look, but I don't think it did. Obviously, Crackling Drake did, Arclight Phoenix did, but we're missing, why don't we have Enigma Drake, which was in M19 Standard? Why isn't that in here? Rotation? I don't know. The Mirari Conjecture seems like, a sideboard spell at best. Niv-Mizzet is a sideboard card as well. And obviously this deck would want to have 4 Arclight Phoenixes. Like, that's step one here. But again, that really pushes the value of the deck far too high, I think. But the thing that really stuck out to me was the non-existence of a blue-white or a white-based control deck. And I'll write my thoughts up on Arcane Tempo here real quickly, actually. So, good deck, obviously. Definitely a little disjointed, but I think, much like they did with the black-green Challenger deck, they want to give you some pass for development. The mono-red and the mono-white decks are, just right out of the box, you just go. But I like that they do give an option to, I won't say more experienced players, but just players who want something that a little bit more that they can tune themselves. That's what these two decks represent here. So to have a good representation of what I consider both halves of the Standard player base, ones who just want to play some casual quick games with an aggro deck, or players who want to build something and really tweak it and tune it, to have both of those represented here is actually really smart here. Back to what I was saying originally. The non-existence of a blue-white control deck. There's a good video that the professor over at Tulane Community College did with Gavin Verhey, who is a Wizards R&D member, and they talked about Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and the fact that he's like $45, $50 still, even this close to rotation, he is still probably, I think, either the most or the second most, maybe next to Karn, expensive card in Standard, which is kind of ridiculous for a Planeswalker. Granted, he's really powerful, but towards the end of its life cycle, so to speak. And the question the professor posed to Gavin was, are we going to see Teferi in a event deck? He said maybe. Obviously, that hasn't happened here. And that was the first thing that kind of tipped me off that these weren't up to scratch, because we got lots of Planeswalkers last year. We got copies of Chandra, Forge of Defiance in the Mono Red Cup, if I'm not mistaken. And to see him not show up here just kind of struck me as odd. But the more I thought about it, and the more that I read, I realized that putting Teferi over these decks would have been a terrible idea. Because at that point, you put one Teferi in, that's your value. You can put in maybe like a Hollowed Fountain or a Glacial Fortress, and that's it. You can't put anything else because it's just that expensive. And what control deck can function off of one Planeswalker? You need 4 copies of Teferi to play a decent blue-white X control game in Standard right now, and there's no way in hell they were going to put 4 copies of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, in an event deck or challenger deck, whatever these are called. That just seems like a disaster for all different kinds of reasons. So when I came back and looked at Arcane Tempo again, I looked at all the decks here. I really came to the conclusion that, like I said, there's 2 people being represented here: the player who wants to sit down and play a quick aggro game, and the other player who just wants to pull it out of the box, add some of the cards they already have from their Standard collection. They've already got an Arclight Phoenix. They're going to take out those Niv Mizzets. They're going to take out the Secret Squires and put in the rest of the Jade Light Rangers, everything else that they need for the Black-Green deck to function well, and really make the deck the way that it should be built. Or, what are they going to do with it? And, it's an interesting sort of counterpoint. So, I'm curious, do you guys disagree with my assertion here? Obviously, these decks are designed months in advance of where we are currently in Standard, so obviously they're behind the curve. But for good starting level 1 decks, it's not bad, and I do applaud the fact that Wizards has churned out another round of these successfully. And I said what I said earlier. I think these are a really good indication of the product continuing to be good, continuing to evolve, and having the right numbers in them, give or take. So yeah, pretty solid product here. I'm definitely excited to see these on store shelves. If my LGS, had Standard play in it, I might be inclined to pick one of these up. But as it stands, it's just draft, EDH. Which I'm totally cool with, because those are probably my 2 favorite formats right now. But yeah, very fantastic product, and I'm excited to see what we do next year. Obviously, Standard's will be vastly different with War of the Spark and 36 Planeswalkers releasing in just a couple of weeks, and then whatever set and plane we go to in the fall. There's a lot that can really kind of shake things up, and having good mana like we do in Standard right now, we might see some really robust mana bases in the next round of Challenger decks this time next year. So pretty cool stuff. Definitely, coming out in the next couple of weeks. I believe they're going to be about $30. So if you can pick them up for MSRP, and even if you have to go online and get them for that deal, do it. There's no point in paying more than these retail for, regardless of where you pick these up. So little consumer advice right there for you guys. All right, moving right along to an article that caught my attention. Let's see, this was on the 15th, so last Friday, and I've gone back to it and read it a couple times, slept on it, read it a few more times, and I've come to some conclusions, actually. So over on CoolStuffInc.com, which I truthfully never really went to. The only reason I found this article is because I saw it linked on Reddit, and it was in the Modern MTG subreddit, so of course I looked at it. But yeah, there's a ton of good content over on CoolStuffInc.com. Like, I usually stick to Star City, Channel Fireball, TCG, and MTG Goldfish for content that I read during lunch, but Cool Stuff Inc., I'm going to be visiting tomorrow because there's a lot of cool stuff here that I think is really interesting, no matter what your format is. So enough free publicity for them, though. So this is the cards that should really be banned in Modern. Now, obviously, we had a banned and restricted announcement update just last week, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and nothing changed. Nothing changed. Now, obviously, we had KCI getting banned previously just a couple of months ago. And I think, and there's a lot of talk about this in the article, that with the implementation of the London Mulligan coming at Magic Fest London this month, actually, I think it's this weekend, if I'm not mistaken, or next weekend, Wizards probably didn't want to do anything too drastic and wants to see the format really stress tested and see where the breaking points are. And so he talks about the cards that are obvious here. First off being Faithless Looting and Ancient Stirrings. And let's talk about Faithless Looting here for a second. It's we look at this card and we just associate it with just doing broken, degenerate things. And it kind of isn't. It's just what it enables is broken. It's not itself broken. We have a full list of decks here. Izzet Phoenix, Dredge, Mono Red Phoenix, Mardu Pyromancer, Bridgefind, Grizzle Brand, Hollow One, Electro Dominance Living In, because apparently that's a thing. That's a lot of decks that this card really kind of props up and enables to do what these decks want to do. Are these decks borderline broken? Yes, but you can't really claim that that's Faithless Looting's fault here. And so what we're going to see in this article is that Jim Davis really kind of breaks down, who, like I said, the real cards that should be banned in Modern. And we'll get to those here in just a minute. Faithless Looting, just an enabler. Just like Ancient Stirrings is just an enabler. Obviously, Ironworks was a key piece of what made Ancient Stirrings so dominant. But Tron, Hardened Scales, War Prison, Land Control, Amulet Titan, Red-Green, or Bantel Eldrazi. Haven't really seen those two those often enough. But still decks that Ancient Stirrings props up. It's an enabler. It helps them perform their strategy. Without Ancient Stirrings, those decks kind of fall apart. Are there replacements for it? Do you just start playing a lot more Sylvan Scryings in Tron? Do you just start playing more cantrips in decks with blue in them? Maybe. I don't really know. But yes, so there's plenty of arguments about these cards. But I think what people are missing is what's kind of on the periphery. These are the cards that enable the strategies, but not the cards that really break the strategies here. And there's two cards in here that you won't be shocked by them. I will guarantee that. But, when you start to think about what the format is being dominated by right now, you might start to understand where Jim is going here. And he makes a really cool aside, actually. A Ponder. Ponder and Preordained are banned in Modern, obviously. And the question is, well, if Faithless Looting and Ancient Stirrings are legal and they're doing pretty much the exact same thing, why is Ponder and Preordained banned? And this is a part where I kind of disagree with him a little bit. His argument is that Faithless Looting and Ancient Stirrings are propped up by the fact that you have to play certain cards in them, artifacts, and cards that need to go to the graveyard to make those cards actually function. Ponder and Preordain have no such requirements. You can literally cast them for a single blue mana, and you can put them in any deck that needs it, the end. Now, I do disagree with that assertion quite a bit, because not every deck wants to have Ponder and Preordain. Storm wants some number of them, obviously. Control wants some number of them. But, if I had Ponder, legal in the format again, would I play that over Hieroglyphic Illumination in my control decks? I don't know. I would need to test it. Would Storm want to play them over the sleight of hands? The way that you scry and then look and then draw, or draw then scry. These things kind of matter. And obviously, Ponder is a powerful card. It's a legacy staple for a reason. Despite the fact that they have no requirements, I'd have to see how the format really shakes out. But I do think that it would be safe for these two, at least one of them, Ponder or Preordain, to come back and be in the format and really kind of see if that can help the decks that might be struggling against these more broken decks and, be able to put up more tournament results here. So that's an aside there. Argue amongst yourselves in the comments. Have at it. I'll join it myself. The real problem cards of Modern, though, he points out two particular, and they all have something very similar, actually the same thing in common. And you might be able to figure it out here just as we go over them. So the first one is Manamorphose, Mox Opal, Creeping Chill, and Necromeba, and to an extent Street Wraith. Now, what do these cards all have in common? On your buzzer. Right, they're free. So that's where he's getting at. It's not the Faithless looting that enables Arclight Phoenix decks to just go off on turn 2. It's Manamorphose. Because I was curious. Like, I hadn't looked close enough at a modern Izzet Phoenix deck until this article came up, and I really went and looked at it, and sure enough, there it was. 4 copies of Manamorphose. I wouldn't have... I mean, I could have guessed, obviously, but, I would assume that we'd be playing more things like Opt, Serum Visions, the full stock of the Faithless Lootings, Thought Scour. I wasn't sure if there was a place for Manamorphose, but there is, obviously, and that was something I didn't really understand until I read this article. Same thing with Mox Opal here. It's basically, he compares it to Mox Sapphire, for crying out loud, in this article, and it's one of those free cards that you're obviously putting in a very specific deck, but what it is enabling is just the wrong kinds of magic in his article and his assertion. Being able to turn on ensnaring bridges super quick by just dropping a bunch of 0-drop artifacts, or Chalice of the Void, or powering out anything degenerate like that in the artifact realm is incredibly powerful. This is a vintage playable card right here for some decks, and that's insane that we see multiple decks abuse the heck out of this card. You have to look back a couple of weeks, and KCI decks were using this card to ridiculous effect to power out their draws and continuously loop their decks. The card is absolutely ridiculous. So I was kind of surprised when he mentioned these two, but the more that you think about them, the more it makes sense. Creeping Chill, Necromeba, not fundamentally broken. I'm going to be paraphrasing here, but they do things that are free and outside of what normal Magic looks like. A buddy of mine we were talking about Modern decks today. He said, "Hey, what do you think about Dredge?" And I'm like, "Dredge is very powerful." I would hesitate to buy into it just because this is thinking about Faithless Looting being banned. And he's like, "Yeah, it looks like a really fun deck. I've never played a deck like it before." And I said, "Yeah, because you never will have. There's nothing like playing Dredge." And it's, the kind of deck that can be kept in check by a large amount of graveyard hate. And we're seeing that in certain decks right now with Surgical Extractions being played in the main board. But to, not outright kill, and by banning any of these cards, we're not outright killing any of these decks. We've already seen the Semblance Amble version of, the new KCI or KCI-less KCI, because now you have Semblance Amble that really, basically do the same thing, just, at a much slower rate. But to take out any of these cards here, Necromeba really, is kind of a card that just continuously brings back Prize Amalgams over and over and over and over. It's just a free card, and it's a pain in the butt just to, I'm going to kill it. I don't feel good about that. And even to an extent, Street Wraith here as well. It's one of those things that really enables Death Shadow far too early, if you ask me. Helps power out Hollow One far too early, and all of these cards, they're not linchpins, like I mentioned. They're more enablers, much like Faithless Looting and Ancient Stirrings are. But what they are enabling is they're not. There's no cost associated with these cards. If I cast an Ancient Stirrings, I've got the top 5 cards in my library. I can miss. I can cast a Faithless Looting, and I might have to pitch cards that I want in my hand. Or if I top deck it late in the late game, wow, that really sucks. Because I have no control where it's on top of my library, obviously, and I might need cards that are there. But Manamorphose, it's completely free. Mox Opal, completely free, and 9 times out of 10, I would say even 9.5 times out of 10, it's free mana. It's a Mox. Creeping Chill, it's Lightning Helix that you basically just play for free. Necromeba, free, and just enables more and more free things. Street Wraith gets you down to such an extreme low life total that your Death Shadows and your Hollowed Ones are just out so quickly. And the payoff for all of these cards, I think, is just a little bit too high. And if you were to take out all of them, maybe one or two of these, and I think that you get a more healthy format, and you get to see things start to diverge a little bit. No longer are we having a main deck surgical extraction in the sideboards or in the main boards. No longer are we putting Rest in Peace and Jeskai and Blue-White Control sideboards because they can't handle this kind of pressure so quickly. A Wrath isn't going to handle it. Cryptic Command will not save you. These cards all just kind of, they're just free turbochargers essentially. They do so much for basically no upfront cost other than putting it in a sleeve and putting it in your deck. So, I haven't gotten to play a whole lot of Modern recently, so I might be a little bit removed from the way the format actually works. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think about these cards here. Necromeba, Creeping Chill. These are simple cards. They've been reprinted in Standard, for crying out loud. Are these cards too powerful for Modern? Is Mox too powerful for Modern? Is a free ritual and a card draw too powerful for Modern? We complain about the format being too fast, and these are the cards that are doing it, not Faithless Looting, not Ancient Stirrings. Let's slow the format down a little bit, and I think this might be where we need to see that happen. And I really do hope that the London Mulligan we're going to see at Magic Fest London really shows us the power level of these cards and takes the conversation away from Faithless Looting and Ancient Stirrings. I like both of those cards. I've played both of those cards, and when they're doing fair things and not being backed up by the broken stuff, it's good, and that's great. We don't want to kill decks outright. Splinter Twin. We don't want to kill decks outright, but we do need to kind of bring the power level down so that your tier 0 and your tier 1 isn't separated by an ocean. And those are just my thoughts. Call it a Desperate Raving, if you will. Hey, they can play Desperate Raving then. If they... whatever. Anyway, that's it for tonight, everybody. I do appreciate you once again hanging out. Let me know down in the comments. I get a little rambly when it comes to Modern talk, and I'll be curious to know what you guys think about Jim's article here. Definitely let me know. Are there other cards that he's missed that you think are the other real problem cards of Modern? Are Faithless Looting and Ancient Stirrings truly the boogeymen of the format, or are they just sort of masking the real, the Phantom Menace, if you will? Yeah. I went there. So yeah, next week we'll be back with more episodes of the EOT Newsflash. The throwdown is tomorrow night. I swear on all that is good and holy, I'm going to get a winning record one of these days and not blow it. Anyway. Also, yeah, get ready in the next week. It might be the first episode of April. PAX is going on next week, and I can't remember which date on. I think it's on the Friday, the 29th, and we're going to see our first previews of War of the Spark. So in 2 weeks, I'm going to go, ooh, that's episode 100. Yes, that's perfect. That is perfect. What a way to ring in 100 episodes here on the EOT Newsflash with a massive new set first look. What a great idea I just had. So yeah, get ready for that next week. Who knows what I'm going to talk about? Maybe some Commander stuff. I've been playing a lot of Commander recently, and I've got a new Commander deck that I'm working on building right now. You guys can't read that. That's okay. Yeah, so once again, thank you so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we'll talk to you guys next week. But until then, let's do it again.